Now we're recording. Hey everybody, this is Thomson Comer at Lambda School, ready to talk about React and Redux. I want to give you some background on why you want to learn about Redux and why you need to know it. It's something that is not obvious at your first impression, especially when you're a beginner at a boot camp style school like what you're practicing here at Lambda School. React and Redux both are part of a new push in user interface design, something that's been developing for really decades in the software engineering world. Many of you will be familiar with the idea of an MVC architecture in your user interfaces. MVC stands for model, which is your data, view, which is the stuff that the user can see, and controller, which is all the brains of the system. Okay, MVC is the predominant pattern of user interfaces in coding. And it has been really for close to 20 years. But what exactly it means has never been perfectly defined. And it gets recreated every time a new platform is developed. So if you're an Android native developer, you get Google's version of MVC. And if you are an iPhone developer, you get Apple's version of MVC, which is often jokingly referred to as MVVC, or Model View View Controller, but it's, all the same, essentially. And then on the web, what we had was everybody makes it up from scratch every single time, up until, I'm going to say, up until, you can correct me, I want to say that AngularJS really got traction about 5 years ago. And before that, every web page is different in the way that it was built. Where the model goes, where the view goes, where the controller goes, totally different. It's why people waggled their fingers at JavaScript developers and web designers and said, oh, web design's the worst. It's because every time you got to make it up completely from scratch. And every time it was made differently than the guy who came before it or the gal who came before it. So in my opinion, Angular provided one of the best solutions to MVC that had been written at the time. And it gained greatly in popularity until React was pushed out. And React is like an extremely lightweight version of MVC. The way that React works is that there's got to be one view at the top.
Perhaps we don't have a
children appear beneath that view, and those are all child views, and they can have child views inside of them. And that is the only way you can build the program. The problem with that design is that all the data that gets shared between all the different subviews has to live in this top view, and it has to get passed up and down the tree by all the child views. So it didn't actually provide the M in the VC. It only provided the VC, and the model part you had to make up on your own. So Redux to the rescue, in a way. Redux provides the model layer for your whole application. And it does it by providing a single source of truth, which is the ultimate challenge in model view controller type web pages. What happened was, time and time again, you would have one view over here that would read data down, and it would display it to the user, and the user would change it. They'd say, okay, I'm adding a new row to this spreadsheet now. And that message would then have to be sent to the database over here on the server, Amazon Web Services or something. And then it would also have to be passed through the whole system, all over the system, down every single branch, so that any other component that might be interested in that new row that was added to the spreadsheet would have the option of displaying it. And it turns out that it's extremely brittle to build a system this way, and it never really worked. It produced a lot of difficulty, and what the solution ended up becoming was using something called an event broadcast system. So if one component got a new piece of data or added a new piece of data, it would just generate a blip. It would go boop, and that blip would circulate through the whole system. And it wasn't the responsibility of the person who emitted the blip to know anything about what other systems would want to know about it. It just said, I got a new row, boop, and it would go up to the top, and then the top would pass it down to the bottom to every single component. And any component that was interested would notice that blip and display the data. That's what React is that's what Redux is providing us for React, that React didn't come with. What you had to do with React was, if you wanted to update that element, it has to work its way back up the tree according to your programming, where we've got little callbacks, and we've got our .props element that we send up to the state, and we pass it up through callbacks, which you've been working on with your to-do, all the way up to the top. And then the top would have to make sure that that data was available for all the children down below it. With Redux, we're going to build something a little bit different. Redux is a new take on this broadcast engine that provides one center for control. And I'll have to keep my terminology up to date as we go through this, because I'm not a Redux genius. I have not built a production application in Redux. I have written multiple production applications with Angular, but I'm not totally first to the game with Redux, and I'm behind there with React and Redux for delivering something that you can get on your phone. I haven't done that yet. So I'll have to get my nomenclature right, but I want to give you this overall description. So let me check my notes here real quick. So what we're going to do with Redux is we're going to make a React app. And it doesn't actually have to be React. Redux works with any JavaScript application. What it is it's a store, it's a data store. That reminds me of another reason that we have Redux that I want to touch before I get into Redux. So event propagation is probably the first reason we have Redux, because it's very hard to get it right. And because different elements inside of the tree must not need each other's knowledge in order to display data. But even worse than that is that your application itself, your user interface, anything that it thinks it knows about the data that your users want to use is probably wrong, especially in a large multi-user system, okay, like Facebook. If you were writing the Facebook homepage, and the first thing that you would display is something about the user's feed, right? And it would walk through all the user's friends. It would find out what they had done and what was latest. And then it would display all those items in the page. And the problem there is that if your application has made its own copy of that stuff, then now all your friends connected in your friend tree, they can't change their stuff anymore. They can't edit their comments. They can't change the picture. They can't even really make a new post, because your version of the app thinks it knows what they've all done. That's called state. It thinks that it knows that Bob posted a picture of his house, and it thinks that Mary posted a comment on Bob's picture, and it's got the specific data, and your app has to get that in order to display it. But the truth is, your app doesn't own that data at all. It's on the server. It's on Facebook's servers. And every time Bob or Mary updates that information, all of your information is now garbage, essentially. All the stuff that your app loaded from the server to display to the user, it's false now. And this is another huge problem in user interface design that React and Redux have been developed to solve. The solution is that with React, the application state tree, or I shouldn't say state, it's a view tree, the application view tree with app up here at the top, and your to-do list here, and your to-do here, and your submit button here in the tree. Sorry, I got a notification and I fell off of my, my train. All these items in the tree shouldn't be responsible for any data at all, ever. They are just pictures, right? All they are is a little wrapper for some text that may exist. And you don't want your to-do list to be responsible for knowing how many to-dos there are. Or you don't want your to-do to belong to a specific person, because it could change. It belongs to the server. It doesn't belong to the objects that are rendering it. Okay, and through the lifetime history of MVC, 20 years of MVC design, every time we build this little view tree, the person who is typing up the code has to figure out which part owns which data and how they deal with it. And Facebook's solution is, shut up, View. None of you own the data. Redux owns the data. There's one store, there's a box containing your state, and it will tell you if you need to display something new. You don't get it yourself. You don't keep a copy of it yourself. You don't, well, those are the two that I've got for you. You don't get it and you don't keep a copy. You simply accept notifications from Redux. Redux says, hey, somebody gave me a new data item. And then everybody inside of the tree has registered with that store. And if they get a notification that says, I've got data that you're interested in, they display it. But they don't copy it. They don't keep their own versions. They don't worry about tracking it. So that's the super high level view of why Redux, why do you care? I felt like I really had to give you this pitch about Redux before we started talking about the code. Because for you as a new developer, it's just a bunch of complexity that doesn't make sense, right? You're still trying to make vars and store data in them and display the data. And that's good. You will figure that out. We are giving you a head start at Lambda School, and we're saying, yes, store the data, but when you get to your professional life, you will not want to store the data. You will not want to write vals or vars or consts inside of your UI rendering code. Just use Redux and let it handle things. So I'm going to jump into this mini sprint now and start screen sharing. And we will build something similar to the mini sprint application. And I'll demonstrate the parts of the Redux application that you will need to build for the mini sprint. So get your typing fingers ready and copy me as much as you can. And also bear with me because I will get parts of it wrong along the way. I have certainty of that. All right, so you can see my screen. Now what I've done here is I've skipped ahead. I pulled the Redux mini sprint, I think. This actually, I might be looking at the full Redux sprint. So let's not do that. I'm gonna go down a tree to my repositories. And I've got the mini sprint up in my browser on my other screen. So give me a moment to find it. There it is. No. Can anybody link me to the mini sprint URL because I don't have it? I had it. Here it is. Redux mini sprint. All right, so I'm just going to drop this down here. Thank you, Raymond. 15 seconds too late. Not even that. 6 seconds too late. But it's okay. You still get brownie points for it. All right. Redux mini sprint. Clone or download. Give me that. Git clone this. There it is, Redux mini sprint. And let's read the README. All right, actions, reducers, the central store, and connecting React components to Redux are the topics. We're going to build this counter, which Sean has already set up for us. And it's full of comments, right? So what do we have? Reducers/index.js, actions/index.js, and counter.js in the components. All right. Now what I'm going to do for this mini sprint, because I'm not going to give you the answer, is I'm going to write all of my elements in one file. I'm just going to put them in index.js because I want to reiterate to you that the essential function of writing any application is that all the code goes into one place. all the code. The function of an import statement is to take the code out of one file and put it into another file. The root file, right? Computer science is always about a tree. There's always a root tree, and everything else gets built down from it. And that's why we talk about data structures so early. Oh, I need to do something else first. npm install in here. And thanks to Sean for building this wonderful repository for us to play with. Or maybe Ben built this, actually. He is the master of pumping out GitHub repositories for lessons. I've still only been at Lambda School now for a week, and I have not had the chance to write any of my own repositories. And for those of you in CS2, you have, I think, like 7 weeks to go, or 8 weeks to go, until you get to my specific coursework. At this time, I get to practice and get to know you and fill in holes working with Ben and Sean's coursework. Here we are. No, Sean made this. Ben made the other Redux repository, which you will be getting to, I think, on Friday. Pretty big npm install. I'm going to shrink this down. Maybe. There we go. Redux mini sprint. All right. So you got to see this funny animation, and it doesn't tell you much, really. What's happening here is that you've got a view application, and something occurs in the view. It could be reading data because you've loaded a specific page, or it could be you clicking on something or pressing enter, and it generates this event. Okay, so Redux becomes the sole source of truth, the only pipeline for all the data that's passing in and out of your application. So I click submit to do, and we create an action called add to do. That's what this actions box is. That's really all it is. It takes a to-do event or any other event, got users, got to-dos, logged in, anything else, and it wraps it in a little header that says, I'm an action for Redux to handle. And then I believe it's called dispatch. That's right, it dispatches the action to Redux. And it says here that there's middlewares that we can write on top of Redux. I don't have any experience with this. It's something that we could look into. Maybe you can do something like store.use, and you can add a middleware. And what happens here is that would process your action prior to sending it into your store, okay? And it may be that, for example, this is something like get users. And the view says, create an action called get users and dispatch it to Redux. And then Redux says, oh, it's a get users action. I'm going to go out to the internet, get all the users, and then return them. Okay, so once that's been done, once this action has entered into the store, data doesn't get updated until it passes into the reducer. The reason it's called a reducer is the same way that you have learned the reduce function in JavaScript so far. We take some set of data and we pass it through the reducer to convert it into another set of data. Redux saves the data. See, that's why it sends it back into the reducer. Let's see. Let's follow this A in. Okay, so the new data comes out of the dispatcher and combines with the old data. The reducer processes it in some way. And then it saves it again. So that becomes the permanent state, whatever the output of that reducer is. And then whenever the state has been created, then it gets notified. It gets sent out to all the views that might depend on it. All right, so that's enough talking about this flowchart. We can start writing some code now. We did npm install, and that was a lot of files. Let's see how big it was. This time we got 175 megabytes of node modules. Something is already running on port 3000. I'm going to kill that. I did. I killed this one, and now I say npm start again. And takes a while, starting the development server. Here we are. I think. This is pretty fatiguing on my own computer. Like, this should be ready by now. It's like it's loading 175 megabytes of compiler. And if my computer takes a long time to load it, then that's bad news, because your computer is going to take a really long time to load it. Now, what do we get? We immediately get an error message, failed to compile. Fill in the button on click. So I learned something last week, which some of you corrected me on, and I'd like to give perfect props on it. But I'm going to keep talking instead of scrolling back through CS2. It's event.prevent default. If you're getting on click or on submit, in general, you want to prevent default in React, or it might do things that you don't desire. Let's see. So we're going to go into what? Source, components, counter.json, where it says you can't put a comment in here. I'm going to say vim source, components, counter.json. Fill. There it is. All right. Delete that. We're going to make a new function. We're just going to say console.log clicked what plus. Yep. Close that. Do the same thing here. Minus, right? I think so. And it's compiling. Still got a problem, it says. Oh, what have I done here? This is inserting a white space, it looks like, which it does not like. What line is that? 26? Yeah. Did I do something wrong already? Yeah, I did. I'm short a curly brace. Because there's two curly braces. One is for the function, which we're defining on click. See, it's a function. It takes arguments, and it points to a function, curly braces. But then in order for that to be something that we can specify in React, that also has to have curly braces. So both of those needed two sets of curly braces to work. And now it looks like we're getting warnings instead of errors, so that's good. We've got something here. And look at the benefit of putting that console.log statement in there. Because now when I click it, it says clicked, click plus, click minus. That's good. Apparently we only need to do event.prevent default with onSubmit. Don't worry about it with onClick yet. All right, so the reason that I opened counter.js is because I wanted to make that warning go away. That's all I was worried about there. Because we want to talk about React first. Import React from React. Import React DOM from React DOM. And then this import create store is crucial. The create store function is the one that activates your system. It's the one that activates Redux, essentially, and allows you to give it power. And this is being loaded from reducers. See, we've created a counter object with import, and it's being loaded from whatever the default export is in reducers. And this is well commented, as commented in Slack. This line instantiates our central Redux store. The create store function receives the reducer that is responsible for updating the store, along with any initial state that we may want the store to start out with, which is none. Okay, but I don't know what counter is, so I'm going to change this. We could go read the counter file, but we can do it right here so that we can stay concentrated. Let's just call it local counter. And we're going to create a function. All right, I save it, it recompiles. I don't think we're going to see anything for this, except it's warning us. It says, look, on line 6 of index.js, counter that's being imported, it's been defined by that import statement, but it's never used. And that's just our linter warning us that we've done something that's against the rules for the linter. Now here in our console log, we can see that the local counter function has been called because I outputted it. See that? That's the console.log of that local counter function. It happened. And just to be more explicit, I'll say local counter is being executed. Recompile it. Now it says it. Local counter is being executed. All right, so this is our reducer. This is the function that takes an action that's been delivered to Redux and does some work with it and modifies the state. So we'll come around to adding that state in a minute. I should bring up some kind of example for myself. There we go. All right, now a reducer takes two specific arguments. I don't know if it takes more, but it definitely takes a state. That's the state that belongs to Redux. It lives in Redux and only in Redux. Each time you get an action, it calls the reducer with the old Redux state and whatever the new action is. And the purpose of your reducer is to modify the state within Redux. All right, so let's also add action here. Okay, so it gets a state and an action. And let's see what happens if we log those without having done anything else. Console log state, console.log action. It's way too big for our purposes. Cool. So what do we got? State is undefined. And the action is, it's got double ampersands. The action, those double ampersand Redux is a private messaging naming schema that Redux has created internally. And they haven't even told us about it in their documentation. It's private. They're using it. It's an action that indicates to Redux that it's turning on. It's being initialized. Okay, probably through this create store method. Okay, now I see something in one of my guide docs that I want to copy, and that's this. It says, make a default value for state, which is going to be empty. I don't want state to be undefined. Undefined is the suckiest value that exists in JavaScript. If something's undefined, bad stuff happens, but now we've changed it. So state itself is just an empty array of size 0, okay? Now I want to show you how to pass this into React. So we've created the store and stored it in this variable called store. And let's see, the comment says it. Here we wrap our main React component inside of provider tags, provider, which come from the React Redux package. This is because the store needs to know where it is passing its state to. The provider component is where the store lives, it says. All right, so let's see if that's in the counter component. We should take a look at this. It does not look like it has anything about state, or rather about provider in it. Okay. Now we've imported connect from React Redux. That's down here at the bottom. It's called at the end. And it says simply connect the counter component with two properties, increment and decrement. These are supposed to be available now. And this is very heavily commented, and I'll read them along with you. Let's go back to the top. Nothing here. Increment if odd. This is extra credit, apparently. Increment if odd and increment async. Now fill in the two button on-click methods. Upon clicking these buttons, the count should decrement or increment accordingly. That makes sense. All right. Uncomment these if you want to do the extra credit. The map state to props function specifies which portion of the state tree this component needs to receive. In this case, since our Redux store is only storing the value of the count, this component receives the whole state. In a more complex Redux application, though, it would receive only the relevant parts it needs from the state object. So I'm not sure how we'd even implement this at this point. It might be simply saying that this is the one value I want to get out of count, but I don't know. I don't want to make any changes to that at the moment. Let's see what's in actions. All right, we've got two actions. Our action creators will return an action packet that our reducer will receive. What does the action packet look like? Note that the action creator is not at all responsible for handling any of the actual logic of updating the central Redux store. That's left to the reducer. Okay, so increment is going to have a title. Let's take a look at this description here. A type is what it's going to have. Here's an action in Redux. This is a function that creates an action. It returns an action with a type, an ID, which is optional, and the data that's supposed to be attached to the action. I'm going to put that back up here now. All right, so I don't want to put this action in here because that's your job. I want to put these actions here. So I'm going to take this counter out. Let's see if this works. Does not like that. That is not valid JSX. All right, so what I did here is I wrote a
Sorry, Thomson. Sorry, it's Sean.
Hey,
to
Sean.
comment out in JSX, go look in the you had it up recently. You need the curly braces and then the comments. It's in the yeah. So curly braces and then remove the. Actually, does that work? No, it's not going to work either. Get rid of the second slash after the first one and replace it with an asterisk, and then invert that at the end. Yeah, perfect.
Thanks, Sean. All right, so now it warns me I've loaded counter and I'm not using it. What I'd like to create in here is just a new element that we can use to play with instead of giving you the answer. Oh, put my semicolon in the wrong place. Don't need it. All right, click me, it says. What happens when I click it? Nothing. That's not good. Oh, there it is. Well, it happens one time, and then it doesn't work anymore. You reload it. Yeah, so it's just running the one time that I load it. So I'm going to take a look at the counter buttons that's been defined in the mini sprint, see if we can copy what it's got. On click. Oh, it's because I haven't defined it properly. I need to make sure that it's a function. We did this before. Now it'll click repeatedly. So we can click this button. And using this button, we're going to now try to create an action, okay? So we'll make a new function. And let's say that it doesn't need to take any arguments. It'll just have data in it. It's going to generate a Redux action with a type. And it's going to contain some data. Let's see. So this is one step simpler than what your mini sprint specifies. We're just going to pass a string that says clicked. Okay. I had a feeling I'd missed something here. Oh, it needs a value. Let's just call it value then. Okay, so now we're clicking click me again. What we need to do is we need to send this action now to Redux. We're going to do that when we click the button instead of just logging something to the console. And I'm digging through my notes real quick to remember how to type that. Let's see. Is it like store dot? Who knows? Let's go take a look at counter.js again. Right? So when we click in here, we're going to send this message through connect. Oh, and this is through this map, which is more complexity than we need for my example. So dispatch. I think we want to do dispatch. Here we are. All right, so we have this store. Now when we click, I'm going to add some carriage returns here so we can add a function. Store.dispatch, click me action. And do we need to put curly braces in it? Let's try it. Nice. So we're getting lots of activity now. See, when I click me, it says I click the visible button. And then it says, look here, local counter is being executed. Right here, this is the store that we created. And it says, here's my state, still nothing. But somebody sent me an action called clicked me. Okay, so what should we do when that happens? Now you'll see many examples of this in the Redux code that's available using a switch statement. Switch action.type. You say case is clicked me. I might be writing my switch statement wrong. And I just go to Google and I say JavaScript switch statement. Although you'll be copying it from some example code. There we go. Switch with parens around the thing that we want to compare, and no curly braces on the compare. Why is that? That's just how it works, folks. So don't sweat the details like that too much. And this is our state. This is the actual Redux state object. Received, clicked me. And then there's a default to do nothing. We'll just leave it empty. Now what I wanted to do is add another case. Clicked you. And I'm almost finished here. Console.log. State object different depth. What should counter do now? And then I want to copy this button just so that we can see that there are two different events that can occur. We'll make a new action with it. And we'll change the function that gets called. Click you action. All right, let's see if it compiles. Wah, wah, wah. Oh, of course. I don't write a lot of switch statements. I almost always write large conditional statements with ifs. Switch statements are funny. They're especially powerful in the C programming language because of special rules that apply to them. Let's see what I've done here. Bad news, broke something badly. Did I leave a curly brace off somewhere? Maybe it's because of this default. Still no good. Failed prop type, invalid prop. Children of type array supplied to provider. Okay, so provider requires a single React element inside of it, is what it says. Provider can't have me writing a bunch of HTML inside of it. That's what this error message says. Provider expected a single React element. So the solution there is to just delete the provider. I don't think we need it. Not for this example. But I've still got a problem in my onClick. What have I done? Let's delete this counter out of here. It says, button on click, expected a comma. Man, I think I've left something out in my switch statement or something. So when you're writing code and you get an error that doesn't make sense to you, sometimes it means that you broke the code somewhere else. And so this is helpful. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So maybe we need parens around it. Maybe we just need a div. Oh, and there's a comma here. That's probably the problem all along. Perfect. Click me says, oh, I forgot to break. So this is an essential lesson. Look, I wrote a switch statement, and it says the state object received clicked me action, and then it immediately says state object got different event, which it did not. It got a clicked me action and not a clicked you. And that's because in every case that you write in a switch statement, you have to tell it after it executes the case to not execute any more cases. That's the special power of switch. It takes special care to use. So we click me, and it's going to create this event and send it to the local counter. And if we click you, it says it got a different event. So what should we do in our state whenever we get a click me? In this counter application, we want to probably increment our counter and display it. All right, so that's pretty much as far as I want to go with this tutorial on the mini sprint, because it's demonstrated to you how to create actions that get called with a type and a value into your Redux store. And it showed how to evaluate those actions in your Redux store and decide to do something with them. Okay, so I think I want to stop now and take questions. I'm sure there are many. There's still 18 of you. If you don't have any questions, or if you are too shy to ask them, then you can reach out and ping me in Slack, and we can talk it through. I don't know what the provider tag does. Let's look it up. It has something to do with the React Redux edition. And I think it specifies which store you want to use. So Redux gets much more complicated as your application grows because you create a different store for each portion of the application that you want to use. So here's somebody else doing the same thing. They're making a to-do lesson using Redux, and they're using provider. what ends up happening is that you have one portion of your application that's responsible for adding and removing users and editing their data. And so you create a Redux store only for users. And when you display that portion of your application, you set the provider to be only the user store provider. Then when you go to another portion of your application, like managing a specific user's posts, you use a different provider just to show the posts, so that you don't stick all the data from a humongous application into one single store. And it assists you in structuring your application, which is what we're approaching with this file structure here that I skipped. I wanted to mash it all into index.js. But you can have in your actions, see, let's go into actions. We could have one that says user actions.js. We can have one that's called to-do item actions.js. And we will only put the actions for that specific group into those files. We can do the same thing with reducers. Touch user reducers.js. And what you end up doing is, instead of making one local counter store, you can have one that's const user store. And you can have one that's const to-do item store. And this would be in a totally different file. It would not be stored here. That's why it's hard to address like larger architectural goals in small demos, because they need to go out and be in multiple places. And then in the file that needed the user store, or displayed the user store, you'd source it. This would be in the root item. This would be in the root React component responsible for managing users. And this would be in the root React component responsible for managing to-do items. And then what do we do here? We said provider store equals user store. Or alternatively, and I'm sure this will break the code, or alternatively, if we were in a completely different component, we could make our data provider the to-do item store instead of the user store. So I'm going to give you guys another 20 seconds for questions. Please ask me anything, and I'm going to turn off the recording if I don't hear any more. Feel free to reach out to me, or Sean, or Ryan, or anyone else available. We are standing by to take your calls. Thanks for coming, everybody. Good luck with the mini sprint. All right, I'm going to close this. Recording's done, and it won't be as hard as you think. Good luck.